I'll just take that away as well. So there we go. That's better. We can all see each other. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Great to see you. Jeff, I believe you've got something on your mind.
I do. Well, I have a question. So we're looking at chapter 4, the world as percept. By the way, he doesn't even get to the word percept until 25% into this chapter. So it's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny, and it's part of the mystery of this chapter. But another mystery for me is he starts off by ironically, again, with the idea that you can't the book is this chapter is supposed to be about percept. He says at the beginning, we have concepts, but we can never define what a concept is with words. And I wonder about. I don't really understand why he would make that statement necessarily. I mean, one has to use concepts to define a concept, I suppose, but and words convey concepts, and there's a dictionary definition of what concept is. It's essentially to I would say to comprehend. Con meaning coming together. And the sept is to take or grasp, so it suggests a complete comprehending something, a complete understanding, or something like that. So knock me off my definition.
Put you off your perch, shall we?
Yeah.
bit more Monty Python references there. Okay, I've actually got a little bit of a spiel perhaps there. So before I get going, Jonathan, would you like to make a little comment?
Yeah, just quickly, but to sort of play the devil's advocate, we could say that to comprehend is what a concept does, but it's not what it is. And just to sort of put all the cards on the table in the sense of this is, the way I take it is it's the same as you can't say what a tree is. It just is. And it's the same. I take the concepts in the same way. They are, and you could exhaust, the whole vocabulary of all the languages in the whole world and never completely define the isness of any particular thing. All we can really say is how they relate to other things.
Okay, I'm going to build on what you're saying there, Jonathan. We've got this well-known ancient Greek. It's like define a human being. Yeah, it's like it's featherless and stands on 2 feet. And the next day, so like the philosopher that's arguing against it, so like, so he plucks a chicken and brings it in, and so like, this is a human being.
He went, oh yeah, my brother. Did you?
I can't remember the names of the 2 guys involved there, Democritus or Democritus or something like that. But anyway, I think it was definitely one of the atomists. But Steiner is actually he speaks very much in the same terms. He talks about the dangers of defining something, and he's much more in favor of characterizing things. And this is what you're talking about, Jonathan, isn't it? Characterizing things from different angles. So let's take like a concept like a wolf. If I asked you, Jeff, to like define a wolf, where would it stop being a wolf and start being a dog? Or where would it stop being an animal and start being a plant? It's any of the descriptors that you take, you can never accurately define these things because it depends on the perspective you're looking at. And I think this is what he's getting at. Perhaps we don't need to like play the game of trying to define a wolf, but I think it would be possible for me to like show fairly quickly how, okay, so you say that, so does that mean this is also a wolf? Do you know what I mean? So let's say it's like it's got sharp teeth. Okay, yeah, we've got lots of animals with sharp teeth, so that's not the defining element. And then we looked at all the characteristics of the wolf: the fur, the shape of the skull, the feet, la di da di da di da, and we find that actually we're sensing something beyond all of these little, all of these different qualities that is actually making this wolf. And I think this actually touches on to touches on a really important part in this chapter, is where Steiner, he turns around this notion that we generally as human beings have, that thinking is subjective and objects of perception, it's like objects of observation, without going too technical, are what is objective. But actually he reverses this and says, okay, imagine the three of us, where it's like we're in a street and we see a dog. Oh no, we'll stick with the wolf. We see a wolf walking down the street, and all of us are viewing it with slightly different eyes. So we might have slightly different. We'll have definitely different quantitative relationships to that dog. So like our distances will be wolf. It will be slightly different. We'll have all of these subjective, these individual characteristics of where we are standing, and so like how our sense apparatus is all like rigged up, which means that we are not seeing the same thing. We are definitely not seeing the same thing, but all three of us will be in agreement that we've seen a wolf walking down the street. And I think this, he makes this argument like subtly when he's talking about, walking down the avenue or the alleyway of trees. So like as they they grow towards you and then they recede into the distance. But it is the same idea that actually the uniqueness is purely in our perception, and the universality is in the thinking. We recognize the essence of that being. We cannot define it exactly in language, but we can recognize it instantly. Does that go a little bit? Does that feel like it's shedding light, confusing, or what happens in you when I describe it like that?
It's helpful. On the other hand, I could say that that which we agree on, that is wolf, is a being that is almost boundaryless, if not infinite, in the ways in which you could describe it. However, that which I use to describe it are concepts, and those are mental descriptions that result in singular and multiple constructs, and that make up that which is in a sense beyond description. However, my concepts would have to be a being as infinite and complex as the wolf, if the concepts weren't, if the notion of concepts weren't definable.
Okay, let's take a simpler example, just a simple geometrical example. The three of us have never seen a perfect circle. but we're familiar enough with the concept of circle to be able to recognize it. It's actually interesting because in geometry, you actually do have a definition of a circle. It's like you've got a point, and it's a series of points that are equidistant from that center. So that can actually be defined. But this actually
then you have to define point and center, and then that's when you find that the point that which we're exploring here arises.
Yeah, I think I was. Sorry, do you want to develop that, Jonathan? Because I actually want to take it. It's like in a little bit of a different direction, but I can come back to it.
What I have to say at the moment is that the thing is, I think the difference between wolf and concepts is a wolf. You can sort of point to it, but a concept, the only way you can point to a concept is with a concept. So I think that's where part of the mystery about them is, that it's deeper even than what you can't describe a tree or a wolf.
You can only describe aspects of it.
Okay, can I ask another question then? Because
just let me finish. Just hold that question, Jeff. I want just on the circle one, because there is also another interesting observation there, because it's like circle. None of us have ever seen a perfect circle. It doesn't exist according to the mathematical description of it. But we have all been capable of developing this concept inside us and recognizing approximations to it. It's like out in nature, so that we all agree that we're seeing a circle. And this links into something I'm not sure, it might be coming in chapter 5 or chapter 6. I can't remember. But another thing that Steiner is going to tell us is that we have to disabuse ourselves of the ideas that concepts are individual. They are universals that we are recognizing, but when we see them out in the world, they are manifestations of that concept, but they're not that concept itself. It's and in that sense, it's like archetypes with Goethe's Urpflanze. The Urpflanze doesn't exist as a being, but it allowed Goethe in his mind to create every conceivable true to life, what would be true to life plant, because he understood, he had an imaginative grasp of this being, of this. I mean, Steiner does talk in the beginning of chapter 4 about the difference between concept and ideas, and an idea is put simplistically, is a combination of different concepts. An idea is a more complete concept, if you like, and in that sense, it's similar to archetypes, where they appear even more complex, but at the root of it, you've got these concepts capable of an infinite way of manifestations, but when they come into being, or when they become immanent, they take on a definite form that reflects that original archetype.
So we can recognize the concepts in material manifestation, and we also know individual concepts in our mind. But then, what the point here is what is a concept, not a concept of a circle, which you could then sort of explicate in words. It's this, it's that. But what is concept? What are concepts in themselves? And it's strange because we know them and we have them, sort of thing. But what is it? And you can't point to it. You can point at the world, the stars, and what is it? What is
as examples of it, but not it itself.
Instances.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would suggest that there's something like an archetypal concept.
Yeah.
And I would make a distinction here, just to keep open the door for for a real ontological world for what is imaginal. That is to say that it wasn't that for me personally, the significance of Goethe's archetypal plant isn't that you could create other plants out of that in theoretical terms. It is that he was seeing the Platonic, say, imaginal reality, and that out of which plants originate, which is different. So this goes to the question I was going to ask, and I think this is important. Grappling with this, it seemed like this was going to be just a mental exercise. They were doing sort of semantic gymnastics around the word concept, but no. So when he goes to Spencer and he describes this, this is a bit of a mysterious thing that's not easy to just one-off it and say, well, what's the difference between what Steiner's describing and what Spencer's describing, right? And it has to do with this idea of the effect having an inherent cause, and so there's a concept inherent inside the event. It's not something I'm adding to the event. It's already there. I just have to go discover it, right?
And we have to discover it. That's also the point.
Right.
It's there, but there's something in us that notices that it's there, and then that leads to the next thing, which Spencer overlooks, doesn't he? That it requires, because he's just kind of like, we come across a partridge, and then we come across the generalized concept of cause and effect.
My own understanding of that bit of the chapter is he's emphasizing the habitual nature of thinking, as opposed to the concept that's underlying it, which is that at some stage in our life, it's like we've learned this conceptual pair of cause and effect, something that you can experience, you can see examples of a billion times over every day, but it's never actually given to you in conceptual form. It's that concept you have to create in yourself to recognize it in the outside world. And this is where Steiner is it seems like he's being pedantic about something, but I think for me, that's at least part of the reason why he's introduced this, because he really stresses this cause effect concept that can never be perceived. It has to be created in us before we recognize it in the outside world. And Spencer just flies over that, says this is a habit of thought.
This is really important to trace, because there's a reason why he doesn't mention percept in the first 25% of this chapter, because he's building up a real experience of the percept once we get there, because it's easier to make a definition of a percept as we're finding out. It's the impossibility of defining the concept. And this relates, so I have two things. One is somehow the concept is related to the I. There's a thread there, and I mean an existential thread. I don't mean a theoretical or
the individual,
a puzzle piecing. I don't mean a puzzle piecing abstraction. I mean the I, and so there's that. Then what was the other thing? The concept. A friend of mine used to say, God rest his soul, his name was Roger Schultz, brilliant man. He used to say that concepts aren't in here, they're not internal to us, that concepts are out in the world, and that we're receiving them, we're discovering them. And I think there's something to that, which is what part of this effect thing. Yes, we do have to be active, but the way in which we're active is in some mysterious way the same process that is providing that there is a concept within all the realities that we are perceiving around us. So that there's something immanent and inherent as relates to the concept that it makes, from an abstract intellectual point, you could go, oh yeah, well that makes logical sense that we would, if the world is made out of concepts in a certain sense, if the world is made out of concepts, it would be, of course, that would be the medium through which we understood the world, right?
Are you saying that he's pointing out that we live also in a world of concepts? And that's what Herbert doesn't notice, or sort of glosses over.
I think he is walking us to that reality, maybe.
So that point that you get to, that you mentioned there, Jeff, is where he gets to, in my mind, at the end of the chapter. And like you say, he's walking us through step by step through this process of what is going on. Because
but he also flags himself up early.
Hold on a second, Jonathan. I want to add something there too. Because he could have just gone back to chapter 2, where talk about Goethe and our flight from nature, and it's like as we left nature, it's like we took a part of it with us, and we're just rediscovering it. But I think what he's trying to walk us through is, rather than starting off at the end point that you're describing there, which we begin to understand as like an aspect of the truth, we also realize that there's it's not just about there being a concept out there. If I can if we compare to ancient Greek thinking, which we looked at in the Riddles of Philosophy, we're presented with the idea that the Greeks, they saw the percepts. They didn't have to create them within themselves to recognize them in the exterior phenomena. This is like one of the ideas that Stein is like communicating in the Riddles of Philosophy. They saw the world and they saw the concept at the same time, or the archetype, or the idea. But we have cut ourselves off from that world. And what we have to do is we have to create these concepts within ourselves so that we can recognize those concepts that are also in the outside world. So the important distinction here is, it's not the outside world feeding us with a concept. We are generating that concept within us. It's like the genius, the intuition aspect of thinking is creating this concept anew within us through our own, it's like mental effort, through the activity of thinking. And then we recognize it in the outer world. And this is like, for me, the polarity that's going on. For the Greeks, it was served up. We, flying out of nature, sort of like we were left just with we split the two aspects of nature in half. We find the conceptual part in ourselves, and when we do that, we recognize it again out in nature.
That occurs to me that maybe Herbert Spencer's sort of more dreaming back in the old way of being, and that's why he doesn't notice what's changed. Because Riddlestein says, therefore, not until I have connected the concept of effect with the perception of the noise do I feel the need to go beyond the solitary observation and look for the cause. But Herbert Spencer just puts it, on observing the ditch side where it occurs, you will probably turn towards the spot and learn by this, etc. And then you are satisfied, you see a partridge, you're satisfied you have an explanation. So he just kind of seems to be in that sort of more ancient thing where this happens and then this rises up and that's the explanation, and I'm happy.
And not recognizing his own his own creation in that observation.
Yeah.
Can I want to go back to the idea that the concept is immanent, and that though I create it, I'm recreating something that already is already inherent. Because the importance of that is that to me, the thread, the connectivity between the duality has to do with that the process of creating a concept is the same process that is occurring in the world in the emergence of phenomena, multiple qualitative phenomena, say.
Hold on, I'm gonna turn off one of those, so Jonathan, and there's a bit of background noise. Are you on your phone now? Let's just see. Can we hear you, Jonathan? Do you want to say something? I don't think it's working on that, Jonathan. I think I'll turn off the phone because we're not hearing anything, and I can see low bars on there. So I'll let you back in on the other one, okay? Sorry, Jeff, about that. Go ahead.
That's okay. It's quite good. We don't need to get ahead of ourselves here. We can continue to walk through the chapter, but he in this chapter he takes he makes the effort to bring the I along to the individual who is the perceiver and the individual who is the thinker, because the individual as the perceiver becomes conscious of objects through training thinking on those objects, and the individual becomes conscious of oneself by training thinking on one's own mental processes, say. And then he uses that to say, then here's the outer world and here's the inner world. And we're trying to overcome the inner and the outer world. And if we go too much into this, and this is not like me to say this because I'm like, I know what a concept is because I create them, and I'm, that's, and I have freedom, and that I think all my own thoughts. I don't receive thoughts from higher spiritual beings or anything like that. That would be an anathema to freedom. But it's all so much more subtle than that, of course. And if we stay too far in our intellect on the side of that we create concepts in order to understand the world, well, that's just pedestrian, right? Of course we do. But are they of significance? And do they actually give us the world? And that's not been established yet in this book, because that's what we're trying to establish, that knowledge is crucial to unifying experience of being in the world, while also maintaining the individuality that knows that being is being unified, and that the process is a being of unification, say, or something like that.
I think someone like Ashton and Owen Barfield would be very happy using a term participatory in that context. It's not a spectator consciousness. It's I am directly participating in.
And the forming of concepts is crucial to that,
Yeah.
somehow. Okay.
And intimately tied up with their heart. I mean, the book is about freedom. It's easy to lose sight of this when we're scraping around in the details here. But if the world imposed concepts on us, there's no room for freedom with that. True freedom, the Spinoza definition, the free necessity that we talked about in chapter 2 or 3, was it? It is actually throughout the whole of this chapter, it's standing. It's like front and center, but like an invisible being. It's like saying, if we're going to take this idea seriously, that I'm acting out of my own free necessity, that means that I've created all of these concepts myself. Because if I was obliged to learn them, then true freedom is an illusion.
And yeah, okay. Well, I think we've done what we can do with that, with the notion of concept and and whatever it is that's mysteriously inherent in the world that makes relevant the forming of concepts about itself, say?
I'm just going to give, this is just for clarity. This isn't like trying to convince or anything, but for clarity's sake, how do I try to think about it? And Steiner describes it like this. The essence that is sort of like living in a plant, that is saying the rules of the universe, the rules of entropy, the rules, the laws of gravity, the laws of destruction, for a while they cease to exist in the plant because the archetype, this sort of living being in the concept, is actually manifesting itself in form. And then when that the etheric forces, as we call them, like disappear from that plant, then it starts to obey the laws of the universe as well. Suddenly gravity becomes a factor again that's real in its life. Suddenly the forces of erosion as well, they become real for that plant, and you can forget all reproduction and that type of thing, because material, it's like physical matter, cannot do that. And if we observe a plant, it's like purely visually, then we, let's say we've got it's like one or two like simple concepts of what a plant is, with a stamen and petals and all this type of thing, so that we can recognize a plant. We are recognizing an aspect of the plant. But when we use someone like Goethe and his idea of the archetypal plant, we realize that this is actually a living idea that is becoming immanent or manifesting, or it's like any of these words that show that something invisible, an invisible force, and natural science is full of them. Gravity is an invisible force. Electricity is an invisible force. Light is invisible. In a plant, there are also invisible forces that are moving matter into certain structures, creating new functions out of material that would be impossible if it was just material. So these concepts are far more than dry intellectual matter. They are formative forces. They are creative forces that live in the real world. But until we begin to understand Goethe in this archetypal idea sense, we aren't capable of recognizing that. We'll just sort of like say these are strange like material forces, can't really explain. I mean, if I give one example, which is often when you talk this idea of plants overcoming gravity. So the natural scientific explanation of that is, oh well, it's a process of osmosis. You know, they'll tell you put a piece of card in water and so like the water will so like creep it up. Yep, you're describing perfectly a process that happens in dead matter, but that doesn't explain how a plant, because a plant creates the structure which it can crawl up before the liquid rises. And so when you begin to look more in detail and feel more in detail what, for example, is happening in a plant, you realize that natural scientific concepts are incapable of describing. It's like how this plant comes into being. Superior concepts, if I could put it like that, are required to do that. And a materialistic mind is not prepared to go that way, but spiritual science teaches about the etheric forces that are there that can eventually become perceptible to someone like Goethe or to Steiner, so that they become a living reality inside us. It felt important that I say that. Does that add anything, or am I just repeating stuff that you already know?
No, it's enriching. It's enriching the conversation, I would say, everything that you've just said. And it importantly delineates between concepts that are used to that are bound to sense perception and material quantifiable reality, immeasurable reality, and yeah, I'll just leave that at that. So what comes to mind now then is the difference between a concept and a percept. So two things. One is maybe it's helpful to define what a percept is, and also, well, let's just leave that there. So what's the difference between a concept and a percept?
Do you want to try answering that, and I add something on afterwards? People might be getting tired of my voice. You've got a softer, more easy on the ear voice. You also talk less quickly than me, so I think I'm suspecting that if anybody watches this video, they actually feel more relaxed when you're talking. So give them some of your soothing, dulcet tones.
That is loaded, man. It's funny because I have a Midwestern accent, though it's not profoundly pronounceable or noticeable. But sometimes particularly when I'm back in Michigan, it comes out and it's super flat. I'm from Flint, Michigan. Anyway, yeah. So obviously, concepts are related to well, as we've defined it. I think we've done a pretty good job.
Percept was where you're going. What's a percept?
Right. Well, this is why he does this, because he wants to create a juxtaposition.
Yeah.
So that
great man.
Right. Yes. So that's why I was going to say that, I think we've done a nice job of getting inside what concepts are, and in a way you could say percepts are the opposite of being inside something, right? It's we don't create our percepts; they're given. Until we make ourselves as perceiving subjects and as thinking subjects the object of observation, and then we become a percept. I think that's really a way to describe what a percept is that which is given, that that we could just well, concepts can become percepts. So if you have a concept and it loses its originating relationship with thinking, then that concept itself becomes a percept.
And he gives that label mental picture, doesn't he?
No, I don't. You and I don't agree on mental picture. We're not going to agree on mental picture at this point in this, because he doesn't even get into mental picture in this chapter. He just says it's the thing that is the thread that links the two together, and and I don't think mental pictures are merely personal. And I think mental pictures are related to the imagination, to the archetype, but they're embodied archetype of the individual as a being that has connected both percept and concept in unification, but as a free act. That's what a mental picture is to me.
And to me as well. It's the internal. It's the internal representation. It's like of a universal concept. It's an individualized representation of a universal concept. But let's take a step back, all the way back to percept, because what does he do in this chapter that I think is for me it's an important step. He's telling us to try to imagine try to imagine being a being, it's like with fully endowed with intelligence, that has never had any experience of the world, and so like suddenly is presented to the world of sensory experience, to color, to dimensions, but thinking has never sort of like had a chance to act on that, what is coming in from the senses, that the given, and to understand how until thinking activity actually starts working on that content, nothing can be said about that content. It's actually the activity of thinking is, there's a dual aspect to it. The way that I see it, it separates out. So let's say we label all the colors, and we label directions, and we label different qualities and all these type of things. So this sort of like cuts up the world, it dices up the world into sort of like all of these different concepts. But at the same time, it's using this dicing up to reconstruct, it's like larger or ideas or archetypes, so that we understand what ideas and archetypes, what are the constitutional parts of those ideas and archetypes. And I think he talks, there was an example I was going to give that I didn't give yesterday because David wasn't there, but I can do it now. So Steiner talks about this relationless aggregate that it is given, and gradually it's like thinking unfurls its activity and begins to like create the concepts in itself which you can recognize in the outside world. But it is definitely a symbiotic relationship that's going on there, a creation of something that's recognized as already as being there in the outside world. And Stein will go on to say that already exists there, but you're recognizing something you've created in yourself as also living outside yourself. But he also talks about the importance of understanding the relationship that percept has to the development of consciousness, and to concepts and ideas, by comparing other beings that might have different percepts, i.e. different senses. And I think you can look at, for example, quantum physics, quantum mechanics through this lens. It's like at the end of the 1800s until at the beginning of the 1900s, humanity had started to develop instruments that were capable of seeing, giving indications of phenomena that were previously completely invisible to mankind. So you've got voltmeters indicating, it's like currents. You've got detections of magnetic fields and strength of magnetic fields. You've got these you've got these devices that can determine like extremely small quantities of energy, the measurement of those. And all of these are feeding into like the scientific community as percepts, as data. And then people like Heisenberg and Dirac and Schrödinger and other people, Pauli and other people that I haven't mentioned, they take this data, and they, in their minds, they're trying to create, and the operative word here is create in themselves, a conceptual framework that allows them to make sense of all the new data that they are receiving. It's like from the scientific community. And in that amazing cooperative effort that happened there, it's like the whole world of computers is inconceivable without the insights of these guys. It's like in the 1920s. It's like all modern electronics is inconceivable because you don't have a theoretical model to explain it. And this is what this is a sort of, for me, a beautiful example of how it's like the activity of thinking unfurls, so like into the world. It's like it takes this percept data, which is a nothing. It's like pre-1920s, any talk of entanglement or so Einstein's spooky action at distance, it's absolutely stupid. I mean, you might as well believe in God to believe in that type of thing, as like an average physicist of the time could have said. And then along comes data and says, you're going to have to reconsider these things. There are some very strange things that are going on in the universe, and our models, which are like extremely good at predicting the behavior, are indicating that our universe is not made up of little small atomic balls, little small protons and little small electrons and little small nuclei that are sort of like spinning around in orbit. No, that model, it's useful, but it's now been superseded. And this is like, for me, this is a really good example of experience directly. If you follow through this process and how these guys battled with, so how do we make sense of all this crazy data coming through? Thinking creates the model, and then there's a certain amount of peace. Unless your name is Einstein, and then you can't accept those theories, and you try to invent like hidden variables in there to like, so as a way of like retaining your old concepts as like the correct way of interpreting the universe. But eventually, it's like someone like John Bell in the 1960s came along, so they said, no, here's conclusive proof. Hidden variables, the EPR paradox, it's all it's completely unconvincing. It has zero, to take a few words from the end of the chapter, it has zero ability to convince these arguments.
Well, I mean, within a certain framework, it has zero ability to convince. Yet we are convinced still in basically that the world works in a mechanical fashion, and we keep creating technologies that that reflect that. On one hand, reflect. This goes back to a volley I sent out. On one hand, reflect a truncated perceptual field in order to leave out all of the variables, the qualities largely that that allow for the model to be a useful model. And this is a bit of a mystery. There's a great book by the author Silko called Ceremony, and in it, as an artist, she deals with the occult nature of nuclear weaponry, and the way in which and it really points to the fact that the models can give us a portion of reality enough to manipulate the mysterious energetic underpinnings of existence so that we can use them for massive destruction, something that is unwieldy and and it's something that we can never come to terms with the consequentiality of our actions because we don't understand the cause. So this goes back to the rustling in the bush and the relationship of concept to cause and effect. That we can be very effective in the world if we have just a little bit of the understanding of the cause that creates the effect. But really, we're just seeing the effect and muddling about with the effect, messing about with the effect to great danger to ourselves and our existence. And so it's all this seems obvious, right? Like, of course, Steiner's right here, and he's he's right because he's actually dealing in reality without a model and without a metaphor. There's no models or metaphors in this chapter, and if there is, they're incidental to the actual activity that's going on with a reader who reads with goodwill and is so participating in the very process that he's providing as participatory cognitive experience, say. So I just thought it was important to interject that the model is, in a sense, I think this is established in the previous chapter, that
because we talked about it last time, didn't we?
Yeah, modeling and speculation and belief are dangerous. They're not just because we there's cliches surrounding this, sayings and such about half understood things are wholly dangerous, and so there, what this chapter lays out is there's no need to stop at the model. There's no need to create models. It doesn't actually establish that, because first of all, you'd have to establish that these processes of perceiving the reality of the conceptual process as we are participants in the nature of existence actually would provide for useful negotiative way to deal with the world, right? If there's no practicality in this, where other than knowledge, where does this take us? And I think that's a question that one could ask about this chapter. And if I were a skeptical friend of mine, I would ask that very question. What good is it?
2 points are coming to mind as you're talking about that. One, so like this is a picture Steiner gives of the future, which is that the future developments in science, like in the knowledge of the etheric, will be a devotional act. It's like morally, so he presents this picture that's like only people of moral character will be able to develop knowledge in this area. So implicit in that, it's like it's too dangerous for immoral minds. And I think if we look at it's like what's happening in the world now, we can see the huge risks we take with these models that we play with, and they fall into the hand of rich and powerful people, and they can cause a lot of devastation in the world. So you can feel a certain sense of relief that perhaps the good guys and girls in the future that will take the next leap forward in humanity's understanding. And I'm talking about it's like a quantum leap. It's like in a completely different field here. That there will be some type of moral requirement to have even access to that understanding. I might be being a bit naive. I know there's a guy called Andrew Linnell. I don't know if you know of his name, but he strikes me as somebody who would be very interesting to ask more about that. I think I get the impression he's reflected a lot on that type of question.
He has, though. And Andrew, I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting you here, but early on, I had just brief interaction on social media, and he was defending the COVID narrative that was propagated by our medical industrial complex and its propagandistic agenda, say.
And so was Jordan Peterson, wasn't he?
I don't know if he was or not. He certainly isn't now.
That's right. He certainly isn't now. I was listening to.
He was. I would say I'm not a Jordan Peterson apologist. I I appreciate where he's good, and where he's good, he's great. And part of that is in the archetype, in dealing with archetypes, and utilizing that in a very fruitful cognitive way, I would say. And he fashions himself a scientist, a psychometric scientist, and he wants to think in scientific terms. And we've talked a lot about the ways in which even the best thinkers, if they're bound to the materialistic paradigm, that it's going to limit where their thinking can go. But it can go far, and it's also a useful device for checking yourself. And so his first approach, and I knew it would be, was to take the science seriously, and assume that the scientific community wasn't captured by these deleterious and very perverse incentive framework, and so he quickly came off of that.
That's positive. Yeah, and lots of people have woken up, but it is surprising when you have these particularly smart people who initially seem to be propagating, it's like part of propagating the lie. I mean, we all make mistakes. I was unsure for several months, but because fortunately I didn't have a public voice, so I didn't need to make any pronouncements. I could be in the background, I would argue being scientific about it. So it's listening to what one side is saying, but also informing myself of what the other side was saying, so that I could to a certain extent, feel secure in my own judgment that there's something far more nefarious going on here than is being presented in the media, in the mainstream media. And I perhaps if I had been one of these people with a big public presence, I might have made big mistakes. It was difficult. It was a confusing time. There's no doubt about it. A very confusing time.
Yeah, I have compassion. I have compassion for that. I love how this is extraordinarily relevant conversation, this part of the conversation, to this work. Because this work is so important in relationship to sound ways in which to comprehend the world, and is doing the real epistemology, as opposed to the versions that have all sorts of presumptions associated with them. If you're going to do real epistemology, you can't have presumptions. You have to get rid of the presumptions. And it reminds me, I was having a conversation at our Waldorf school at an annual meeting, and a woman was there, and she announced herself as a microbiologist and all the various things that are associated with that, geneticists and that sort of thing, and she was she hadn't been she was a grandmother of a student, I believe, and she hadn't been around the school for a while, and the school didn't have a high school, and for anybody who knows about Waldorf education, science is brought in. Is there all along, and it increases in the discipline of the phenomenological approach to science as you go farther. And so it's very pronounced in the high school. They have a robotics program. They have no budget, and they were second in the state in robotics because they think. And people wanted them to be involved in their project, so that they could contribute that ineffable aspect to the project. But anyway, I asked her, because she was lamenting that there's no science at the school, and I said, "Oh, well, we have two very good science teachers, Dr. Blank and this guy who was an astrophysicist, among other things, and excuse me." And so I said, have you talked to them? Because it would be good to talk to them, and then you could see what kind of science they're doing. But they do phenomenological science. Have you ever heard of Goethean science, the Goethean approach to the scientific method? It stays with the phenomena and eschews
Careful observation.
eschews models, and it moves. They do experiments, and they have real tactile experience, and then they understand the foundations of science as a knowledge endeavor. And she said, "Well, that sounds very deep." Said, yeah, well, yes. So what that told me, and some subsequent concepts that came from her mouth, were that she's never examined the methodology of the science that she's approaching. She's just accepted how biology is taught. And there are how many models of the human cell are there? That are, I think I counted 14 of what the cell is, and what the membrane is, and if there are attractors on it, called whatever, like sensor kind of things. And the more that biology becomes technologically dependent, the more the terminology out of that technology creeps into the conceptualization of what the cell is. So this is a long-winded way to say conceptualization without percepts is very dangerous as well, right? And where is the cause in the way that people are thinking about the way the world works now, whether it's science or just the pedestrian everyday person? What's their relationship with what's causing the rustling in the bushes, right? And seeing that the rustling in the bushes isn't the cause of the bird, right? It's the bird, and the bird is a being, and then we have now then some mysteries to get into.
And you're not a research director of Pfizer who thinks it's perfectly okay to be developing variants of the virus so that you can develop new vaccines, commonly known as gain of function. I'm talking about this recent Project Veritas series of videos, and there was another one today which is talking about he's admitting we knew about problems with linked to menstruation and that type of thing. It's very problematic, but in all the media at the time, it's no, this is all fake news, this is all conspiracy theories. And here you have a guy who's responsible for a research program saying, yeah, we're worried about it, but he didn't step up to the plate back when people start talking about it, saying, yeah, actually, you got reason. There's cause for this concern here because we're seeing the same data.
Well, that's another conversation, because I can't let this slide by without suggesting that there is no virus. So what is this research that's being done? Something's being done, no question about it. And production of pharmaceuticals is being done in response to what exactly?
Yeah.
And again, the the idea of the virus is a model. It's so where is the perception of the actual virus? Where is the percept? Show me the percept. Show me the money, because it hasn't been shown. And so I believe this is just part of the propaganda machine. If I were to guess, that this is a way to legitimize further production of the medicalization of life.
Yeah. I know there's a anthroposophical doctor called Tom ? And a New Zealand doctor called Sam Bailey, who I followed, and I think they're very interesting on the point that you're talking about. The whole virus theory. Is it just an invention of the mind? Because they talk about the inability to they don't call it to identify. There's a technical term.
Isolate and purify.
Exactly, isolate and purify.
Right.
And it seems with the evidence that they're providing, there's nothing to support it.
So
They're ghosts.
let's examine that. Let's follow the thinking here, because this is what we're talking about. It's thinking.
Yeah.
First, there was the revived simplistic germ theory applied to viruses in order to convince people that there was an infectious illness that was immediately spread around the planet with no explanation for how that immediacy occurred. Not a good one. I haven't heard a good one. So first there was that, and then there was well, we need something to address that, and so we developed a pharmaceutical intervention, a technological pharmaceutical intervention. And now everybody admits that doesn't work. Even Bill Gates, who is one of the greatest propagators of the thing.
Three weaknesses he talked about. They don't work. They don't stop transmission.
Right.
And probably his third complaint, they didn't make him enough money. But
so he talked about another applicator, another way, a different thing that would, right. So we've got new technology coming down the road, right? Okay, so if you're invested in the narrative continuing and you were revealed as wrong, would you just say, "Oh my gosh, we were wrong about the whole epistemological underlying multidimensional factorial field of percepts that we have to re-examine so that we have a better understanding of human biology and what the cell is in its living environment, rather than having a model?" Because you'd have to say, I was wrong about all the speculation and the theorizing, and let's go back to biology as a phenomenological experience. So you could do that, but then if you did that, you would have to give up all the investments and all of the careers and all of because the whole thing would just fall apart. Where are you going to find them? Then all of the research would have to end up in Ghent, New York at the Nature Institute, because it's the only institution that is actually doing this kind of involved research and science, and teaching it and teaching how to teach it. And so if that person, then it would be better if there was a unwieldy gain of function narrative that allowed you to keep in play the threat, so that you could still have okay, so that's science. What they'll say is, well, no, we didn't get it right the first time, but that's science. Then we'll get it right the next time, right? And so we're not talking about the whole concept of germ theory, and then the addition of the absolute causative factor, and here we're back to cause, of gene theory, that genetics are, as the word implies, the genesis of how life operates, right? No, it's not true. Yet there's a multi-trillion-dollar industry just applied to cancer and gene therapy, right? So so the thinking went wrong, and I can't sit by and say that I accept this idea that there's a gain of fun. It's like getting involved in the drama somehow. And his name's Tom.
I'm gonna steer us back 500 years. It's ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as the Catholic Church selling, what were those letters they sold? Indulgences. It's a profit-making machine. It's got nothing to do with God, goodness, beauty, truth, love. It's money. And they've managed to convince a lot of people that it's about helping them, keeping them healthy. But the people are waking up. Not enough, but people are waking up thanks to this huge assault on mankind, of truly amazing scope.
So going back to the text, then, what is a phenomenological relationship between percept and concept, and the engagement of the he uses this term, the at first subjective thinker or perceiver. So he moves us from the sequences of observation and thinking, and moves us into let's
The inner
pay
realm.
attention. Yes, let's pay attention to the being that is doing the perceiving and the being that's doing the thinking. And then at first, you watch, you observe something, and then you bring the percept of that which you observed into a subjective state. And it is subjective at first, is what he says, at first. Whereas with material science, the idea is that is an absolute subjectivity. But he's moving beyond that, because then we're creating something. We're in a sense affording this subjective experience an ability to itself become the knowing doer, to become the one that has the to become. So this is where the freedom comes in, because it's not just about creating concepts now. It's about creating concepts that are tied to the reality of the percept that was first brought into this subjective experience. It's a sloppy description, but I wanted to bring us back to it, because in the face of these world forces driven by materialistic and so-called natural science, what effective means does this epistemology provide for that allows us to reunite with the world? What is this? What could we do?
For me, I've read this multiple times, obviously, this book, and there was one phrase in there that I never felt that I nailed. This time I did. And I'm going to try to describe the initial confusion and how Steiner resolves it. So after we've been introduced to the percept, thinking, unfurling its activity, Steiner describes how it's like we look at a tree, recognize my concept of tree outside in the world, it's there, but I have this inner faculty to then take away that inner picture, that mental picture, my own personal representation of a concept, and that I can carry around with me. And my feeling life is a similar percept. It is something that can become it's something that lives in me, but a mental picture, a feeling, a memory, all of these things that we can experience in the inner life are percepts, in the same way that they can then be, it's like thinking can pour out its activity onto these and reveal something that wasn't previously visible. So for example, let's say it's like our discomfort around the narrative of, it's like the whole COVID hysteria. We take our feelings seriously and try to look for a more balanced picture of it. There might be very little in the environment that's sort of like giving us, it's like, evidence for the senses, but there's a part inside of us that says something's wrong here, something's a bit fishy, and that so that feeling life becomes like something that becomes food for thought. But this is the really key part for me, is that thinking itself can then become a percept. So this thinking activity, so like unfurls, it creates something new, it creates a concept in us, or it creates an idea, it creates connections that we previously didn't see. But once that experience has been had, that itself becomes if you like, an object that lives in our inner life, which can then become the the object of thinking. Where thinking is the subject and the inner experience is the object of that thinking. But this is this particular experience of where thinking becomes the object of thinking is actually quite unique in the soul, because it is the one thing that we have consciously produced. Therefore, unlike with every other percept, we don't understand how the light in the outside world it's like moves through the aqueous humor in the eye, how the eye it's like it inverts the image because of optics, and then how this light, so after passing through this fluid, it hits the rods and cone cells at the back of the retina, and so like converts that initially into it's like with because of the chemical reactions of the what do they call it, the purple or something like that, I can't remember, but the chemicals at the back of the eye, they respond differently to movement and light to create electrical activity, which like then so like disappears into the back of your brain. We can't follow that process from where it sort of like goes and becomes the perception of the tree that I see out the window at the moment. We cannot follow that. But there is one area of our soul where we can know the whole provenance of a percept, and that is with our thinking, because we are the ones that have generated it ourselves. And this is why this is for me so key to piece together that when thinking about thinking, we are we've missed out a big part of the conversation, but it's like how thinking creates the concept of self itself here. But when we then like engage in this process of thinking about thinking, we are discovering the essence of ourselves. And this is a spiritual activity, because thinking is a spiritual activity. We are rediscovering our spiritual nature. And just to top it off there, this is so important, because when we begin to deepen into this experience, we no longer need to talk about beliefs. I believe in this, I believe in the spiritual world, because I am starting to have experiences of the spirit. And then obviously, so like you and I, we've got a long way to go before we're like capable of the same type of spiritual research that Steiner was capable of. But in this activity, in the exceptional state, we have started off on the path of experience. We're moving beyond belief, looking into ourselves and discovering our spiritual essence. And this became this time this really sort of like I could piece that together a little bit from like my other anthroposophical readings, but in this chapter it's like bam, it's there. It's like it's there with a new clarity. And I think this is one of the reasons that Steiner says that's like the he's got all of his books on how to know knowledge of the higher worlds and meditations and the esoteric schools, which are all of immense value. But he points out time and time and time again that the philosophy of freedom is the safest, concisest way of beginning to enter into a spiritual relationship with the world. And I think he's already indicated that in chapter 3, and he's beginning to relate sort of like our everyday experiences to how intimately they are connected with this thinking process.
I'm struck by So here's the skeptic, and the skeptic says, "Well, I get what you're saying, and how do I know that's not just a special instance of uh, of a special, unique, and isolated instance of the way in which you are are creating something transparent to yourself, and that it has any relevance at all um, for how for the plant, animal, right? So so there's that side, but there's of course the other side is that that there are three sides actually. There's Steiner himself, who's doing the work. Has done the heavy lifting here. Must have been extraordinarily triumphant for him to have achieved this work of art.
That's such a
That
young age as well.
that is actually making transparent a portion of reality that is potentially the leverage to understand and act in the world in new and more powerful and self-understanding of consequences ways. So and a remedy to that which is rampant in our environment. So there's that feeling that's possible, that there's that, because he's doing it, and then look at what it produced actually in the world. His influences aren't admitted by our world, but they're schools of education all over the world. There's a farming practice. We went through this before, right? There's actual practical applications that have come out of it, and so I understand all of that. But staying within this work, I think these can be important questions for the purpose and process of grappling deeper into this. And I think that there is the key in this chapter, which you brought up, which is how exactly do I come to have a what did you say, a percept of the self? How do I come to actually he also asks the question, how does a percept come into my consciousness in the first place, right? So I'm sure those two things are tied, but I'm at this right now. I'm doing this thing that I don't usually do, because I usually try to feel into it and feel where it is that this is so profoundly meaningful. And I think that I think I've represented that, but I also feel like why isn't this just a special instance of universality? Like, or what makes it universal, say, and why isn't it like I can do it, you can do it, right? Achieve this exceptional state, say. But what puts them together? And I think this is also the power of I've never read this book with other people before, and this is a powerful a powerful process, and I think we have a responsibility to stay within the text that we have, and we can make other references, but I mean to when we're actually doing the real
working out of the essence of the book. I think what you're onto is like something really important and exciting for I believe for the group as well, that like you say, there's a big difference in I'm gonna talk about chat. I might talk about ChatGPT in a little bit here, but there is such a huge difference in working together with a group, and you obviously you form your own thoughts about what you're reading. You try to make sense of it, but then you come along and you say, I'm reading this out of this, and Jonathan says, I'm reading this out of this, and we are perfectly okay, because our society is built on it. What happens when people sort of like come together to form a company? They can create things that would be possible for it's like just a bunch of individuals running around without any ideas. And with this type of community, I do believe we're beginning to create something really quite special, where we don't know exactly, we're not like fully conscious of the process that's going on, I don't believe at the moment, but there is definitely a coming together of streams of understanding. And at some point they begin to gel within that community, so that they become it's like a source of life for that community. And this is the real value for me of that's a transformative experience of doing the Riddles of Philosophy together, which I'd only listened to once, so I hadn't worked with it seriously. Working with that seriously, and then working with this seriously. I mean, I thought I'd done quite a big job last year when I tried to memorize the essential content of the Philosophy of Freedom. I felt I could identify significant steps forward in my understanding. And now I'm coming back to it 1 year later, working together with a group. And I'm seeing things that I just didn't see then, that I thought I'd achieved, so like a level of clarity, so like way beyond where I was. And the same thing is happening again this year. And I'm fully conscious of the fact it's that you, Jonathan, and I are talking about this. We're talking about this together in Matt's group. We've got the volleys going on. We've got comments in the YouTube videos. All of these things, all of these different thoughts around it, they create strength as you engage your thinking to try and make sense of these different perspectives, these different aspects that are being brought forward. So I do think this is very, very interesting. What Matt and Ashton started just September last year, was it? Something like that. It feels like we've known each other for a while, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And because of the immediate depth of knowing, which should be evidence for me in and of itself. It's also important to realize that when dealing with reality as opposed to models of reality, it's not static, it's fluid. So the fluidity is something that you have to grow in grow in strength to maintain a center. Otherwise you're swept away by a certain group of concepts that become something you're needing to cling to like a raft. Because this is, as I mentioned in my response to Kate on volley, this is a deeply alone experience that we each have to have in order to gain the universal experience. And that is and I know that this book is an epistemology is epistemological ground for his spiritual work, particularly surrounding Christ and Christ consciousness. And I think we can we'll probably notice that emerging more and more as personal experience as we work with this book. I mean, it's possible to, and I threw Christianity out with the bathwater till I ran into this book. I really did. Like I was like, that's just nonsense. And and then you come at it from this very deeply personal way, and you're like, oh, well, maybe that's what people meant by the cosmic Christ or Christ consciousness, right? Yeah. Particularly, fairly mainstream thinkers who, like maybe like of an Alan Watts kind of caliber. So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously I'm not skeptical about this process, and it's really important that we go through it alone, with each other. Do you know?
It's both, isn't it? You've got to have your own take on it. You've got to do the own inner work, and then you've got to dare to talk with that process about other people, so that you can identify those areas that you're not as clear about, or where you perhaps have sort of like only like fiddled with the edges of a concept, a particular idea that he's trying to develop, and then somebody else is able to shine a different light on it, where it comes at you in this new clarity, where you sort of like you look at it and go, how did I miss that before? Why wasn't I capable of seeing what I can see now? He doesn't talk about intuition in this chapter. He's going to start talking about it in the next one. But I think especially once we launch into the intuitive part, then so like the spiritual aspect of the the activity of thinking becomes something that's, dare I say it, even more tangible. It's more directly experienceable as, gosh, yeah, where do these new creative ideas, what part of my soul do they come from? And when we begin to ask ourselves seriously this question, we are slowly approaching, and we got to do it thousands of times, but we are slowly approaching this region of the soul that Steiner is talking about, which is where you can receive into yourself Christ consciousness. You're preparing yourself for the meeting with the guardians of the threshold, where what was initially like an intellectual training, a schooling, ends up leading to direct perception.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we're dealing with the I would argue the most important epistemological work ever written, and I would suggest the only truly epistemological work ever written that could be taken down by people who are better read than I am. But I'm suggesting that because with Kate's at Kate's sort of inspiration, I went back and started reading through Truth and Knowledge, which was the dissertation that was meant to be the introduction to this, and he speaks about it in very well. It's an academic work, and it's.
Did you just turn down the mic there?
A little bit. Did it too much?
Yeah, a little bit too much. Yeah.
Okay, it's an academic work, so it's meant to describe rather than to make available as experience this the fruits of this epistemology, say. But even if we just stopped right here at this chapter and say and understood the need for an epistemological purity for the way in which we can understand how we come to know things, one could be convinced that one could, despite the complicated nature of the scientific landscape that's before us and all its deep specialties, from quantum physics to all the specialties within the medical industrial complex of specialties, to complex mathematics, and on and on and on. You name this, the discipline, neurology, genetics. The silos that they exist in are so deep because of the speciality that they've been able to achieve. Miracles, really. Just I don't wish to sound like a Luddite or anti-science. I just think they're well, I won't even say, because I think I've said enough about that. Mm-hmm. But the possibility when doing pure epistemological, say, research, is that you can transverse those disciplines. And it doesn't mean that you become an expert at brain surgery, but it means that that you can be in conversation with a brain surgeon about what brain function is as relates to life, as opposed to the mechanical models that describe the brain so well that surgery is quite effective on the brain, right? Yeah. But then you can differentiate between the two, and you're not likely to get fooled by one point of view or the other, because if you sit and listen to a geneticist that you know, maybe 10 years ago, I would have been completely convinced that all the words I'm saying right now are somehow predetermined based on a set of probabilistic easily modelable and computable finite possibilities that result in these words that I'm saying now, and so that value is not lost on me as we go through this at this point. And then also, we can't end without talking about this glorious takedown of Kantian, of the Kantian. The end of this is like, it was like he was like he was like Michael Jordan.
Merciless.
He was a Michael Jordan of epistemology. He's like going to the hoop and slamming on the, and then slamming again, then hanging on the rim. He just kept coming back and just relentlessly tearing apart this elaborate, complicated edifice that our material view of the world is built on.
Yeah.
Read it, people. Read it. It's amazing what he does. It's just like fireworks and symphonies going off in your head when you go through this. That's why Kate.
You're absolutely right. It is interesting, though, isn't it, that when you try to, or for me, it becomes easy with time, but I'm going to stick with the I form here rather than generalizing it out, but I was capable of I could understand the conclusions, how it's like you can't refute naive realism and replace it with critical idealism if you use naive realism as the basis of your arguments. That is particularly that's somehow easy to grasp. But if I go further back into the process, certainly in the past, it was a lot more difficult. My thinking would continue to get stuck in. But these percepts, they are subjective, and I really do only know this this electrical impulses, and how does the light and all of this type of things, how do I even see? And it takes a lot of effort to be able to cut through that without rereading the book, so the chapter multiple times, to be able to recreate that thought process where you're no longer left wondering, how did I arrive at that conclusion? Because you've gone through the clear step-by-step process that he's developed in the book, so that you can go, oh yeah, well, if that's the case, and I think about this phenomena, then okay, that's a logical consequence of that. That's a logical consequence of that. That's a logical consequence of that. And the chain of thoughts becomes a lot more robust, so that if you're thrown into the middle of this chain of thoughts, you can find your way to the end of rejecting critical idealism, and therefore this sickness of doubt. It's about what we can know about the world, because ultimately it is Steiner's talking to a sickness that we have. You could argue it's a healthy sickness, in the sense that we do need to doubt our thinking, because we do make errors, because we attribute concepts to percepts where they don't belong, and we mix these things up. But that doubt, in Kantian terms and in Berkeley terms, is incurable. Steiner is saying there is a cure. Know your thinking, and you will slowly cure yourself. And so it reminds me, there's a line from Hamlet where it's I think the king, he says, throw physics to the dogs, I'll nothing of it. And it's this idea that no, I've got to strengthen myself, and then I will be rid of my doubts. And that's where he leaves us at the end of chapter 4, without us a true resolution, but an idea that this doubt is unfounded. But he doesn't pull us all the way up, because he's going to introduce this aspect of intuition.
Well, there's a few things, but one I was just inspired to remember that I wanted to bring up, which is that Berkeley is, the way he uses Berkeley here, this guy can steel man an argument like nobody can steel man an argument, and the power of the way in which he steel man's arguments, and then leaves the door open for that which is still true. So he doesn't like make a hard judgment. He doesn't even make a hard judgment with critical idealism. He just says, your first floor collapsed. Your first floor collapsed.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was the ground of your argument is now on top of you. All right. And how are you going to live with that? It's not satisfactory, but he doesn't say it's wrong. He just says it doesn't satisfy the soul, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is Berkeley, right? And so he uses Berkeley at the point where he turns in relationship to Berkeley. He doesn't make any definitive statements about Berkeley's idea that everything is basically our mental picture, but that mental picture is the reality in a spiritual world of realities, which is kind of Hegelian, if you could, because where's the soul element? But let's leave that aside, because then he quotes Berkeley as saying, that's with this in mind, the power of the mental picture. With this in mind, I can't rest with the idea that there's not a conscious spirit at the heart of existence. Right? He quotes that. He uses that term. So he brings Berkeley along. I didn't say that. Berkeley's the one that said it. I'm going to demonstrate it later on, but that's just genius, just fantastic. And that
it does
leads
it so
to the
often.
takedown.
He did it in the last chapter with Schelling.
Well, he did it all through Riddles of Philosophy too, right? And Spinoza, he did it with Spinoza, because he has deep love and respect, and he can steel man people to the end. It's amazing. So, and so there's not a bit of like, he's so careful by going back through the example of the mechanical picture of the way in which we see or perceive. He's so careful that he keeps going back and teasing out a little bit more elements and a little bit more elements and reducing it to the dust that it is, and reduces it to a foundationless thought picture, abstraction that we we know that thought picture has an effect on the world. So to answer my own questions about and skepticism about this, what does a completely different paradigm as a thought picture, can it understand its consequences, or is everything going to be plausible deniability all the way down? Right? Like, I mean, we're just doing science. We don't know what. We don't know how that affects anything. I mean, who knows anything? Nobody can know any of that. That's hubris. We just continue to do our science, trial and error, and
if we're working at the speed of science, did you hear that comment by the Pfizer deputy Buller? He refused to testify to the European Union, and then he sends along a deputy, and she gets the direct question. So, like, did you ever test for transmission? Oh no, we couldn't do that. We were moving at the speed of science. Direct quote.
Wow.
So they're admitting that they never ever. This is the company that's like saying everybody should take it because it prevents transmission. They admit straight up, we never tested for that. We couldn't do that because we were moving at the speed of science.
Furthermore, nobody in that in complex of people ever tested for a pathogen being transmissible, or that pathogen is the transmissible thing, or that transmission is a thing as relates to catching through aerosolized. Right. So no demonstration of that at all. In fact, if you go back to the literature around the way in which germ theory itself was established, the most famous experiment is the Boston experiment, where they had people do all sorts of things who had some sort of respiratory distress, inflammation, or whatever you might call it. They couldn't make other people sick. They couldn't make people make other people sick because that is not how the human organism communicates, right? And so we don't have to go into the way in which it does, but it has
Are
something
you,
to do.
go on, give a brief introduction to terrain theory, just for people who've got no idea what we're talking about here.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call it. I don't have to. I don't have a need to call it terrain, but I would say that we are information. We're information biologically. We're informational beings, and that information is conveyed largely through water, and that Zach Bush uses this. I don't agree with Zach Bush's epistemology, but he uses useful terminology like viruses are out there as updates, as updates to. In one could sort of compare it to the way trees, through rhizomatic activity, communicate with each other in order to respond to a threat in their environment. So basically, what we're talking about as illness is transmissible through means similar to the rhizomatic activity, right? Except that we are the way in which we're rooted in the world isn't into the earth. It's into phenomenological spheres that our science won't examine, and so can't develop any percepts about, but that spiritual science is used to investigate. That's the way I would say, without coming down hard on a belief. Like I don't know. I am not certain, but I certainly question people who are certain about germ theory. And
Just a random thought here, Jeff, just because we know what platform we're on. Do you think we should have a Jimmy Dore finish to this video? Do you know Jimmy Dore? So
I know him.
I would like to tell the audience that scientific consensus has proved that vaccines are safe and effective, and everybody should take them to prevent transmission. And if you haven't got your booster shot, please listen to President Biden, because he tells us we need to have our shots. And I fully endorse Pfizer and Moderna because that's the way I avoid censorship. Jimmy Dore, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's a friend of mine, Guy. He introduced me to him, and he says some really interesting stuff, but he flies by without the WHO Google misinformation label even under his videos.
Yeah,
because it seems that he's saying the right things.
We may want to back this one up on BitChute or but yeah, no, and he says it in ways that this isn't an endorsement of him. He's quite a character, but he's sort of typical New York kind of Rat Pack kind of sensibility. He's like forget about it. They have all of these sort of slightly obscene little sayings that they do, and they've hung their hat on that. And he's funny. You're right. And he also does these video analysis, which are fun to watch, but they also take things out of context, which you go, your method's got to be super sound. I find it entertaining, and I'm glad he's fighting the fight. But it's interesting that as relates to taboo, because we were talking about the epistemology of germ theory and what's considered possible to talk about. And so gain of function was not possible to talk about without getting taken down as anti-scientific. Now, suddenly, it's the most popular thing to be talking about because of the plausibility of it that has risen to the point of accepting either that it did occur or that it's likely to have occurred, or even if it didn't occur, that there's no reason to think it couldn't occur. Say,
can I tie this back to the book?
Which is interesting, but let me just finish this thought about taboo, because what Stefan Lanka and Tom Cowan and Sam Bailey and her husband Mark, I think, and then a whole host of people outside of that. Stefan Lanka, did I mention him? Andrew Kaufman, and then more and more and more and more and more and more people joining this this description, it still is taboo, and it's equally plausible. This is the thing I want to say, is if you can do epistemology, you can see how germ theory is plausible. You can see how a picture of that Zach Bush brings, which is there are viruses, but they're they're not pathogens. They're genetic updates. And you can see that within an evolutionary context, and why it would be important not to interfere with that process. And you can also see that likely there could be that we have events that occur increasingly globally and planetarily that are very toxic, including lying and fear mongering among them, but also don't say the words electromagnetic frequencies. You know, I mean, these are all well illustrated scientifically to be plausible at the very least.
And the link here with the chapter for me with this whole conversation, which might seem to be sort of like far removed from the philosophy of freedom, is that when you censor information, you are removing percepts, and therefore you cannot form correct concepts. So if you have a force in society that refuses to admit certain like demonstrable facts, then you inhibit just like a proper understanding of the nature of something. And it's like censoring is like a form of spiritual sickness. It's saying, I don't want what is true to be true, and I'm going to try and eradicate the evidence of it. And by doing that, well, we've seen what's happened over the last few years. What can be some of the extremely far-reaching consequences of limiting percepts.
You couldn't be speaking more profoundly about the relevancy of this work. Like, I would come at it from a slightly different angle, but that to me speaks for me even better than I would have said it. That's actually like where you know, there are a lot of people who talk about the importance of freedom of speech, and Jordan Peterson is one who talks about it in so I would say archetypally profound ways, like in linking it to the logos and finding meaning as a way to be even biologically responsible to health as relates to being stable and unmoved by the whims and sort of polluted propagandistic and technological environment where the senses can just pull us in all these directions, all directions, and an advertising industry that's trying to get inside our desire body and provide the imagery that would allow a capture of the process of inquiry as the deepest one of the deepest instincts and interests it is to be a human being. These are great ways to talk about the freedom of speech, and this would be a travesty to me if this little video were taken down because we talked about things that are all extremely plausible, and not only plausible, but plausible in the light of an epistemology that is highly likely to give us reality in its fullness, and certainly as an agency and certainly as a tool for finding more stability, health, and autonomy in the world, to say at the least.
With those Michigan dulcet tones who make doom and destruction sound so pleasant.
Oh, sexy even, yeah. And here she comes.
sorry, girls and ladies. Jeff's a spoken for man, but I'll leave those dulcet tones with. So please give the final word, Jeff, and I'll press the stop button.
I love this. Thank you so much. That's the final word. I think I speak for us both.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.